Hi, and welcome to the I Teach Myself podcast. My name is Matthew Miniman, and this is episode 115. What can group projects teach us about shared responsibility matrices? So, group projects. For those of you who have gone through the American school system, gone through high school, probably also gone through college, you've probably had an experience with group projects. Group projects being projects that are assigned to a group of students, and everyone is judged equally on the result of the project, not on their contribution within, which is kind of bullshit for a lot of reasons. Well, one, because the quality of my work might be less or more than the quality of work of other people. The project may not be necessarily tuned to a group, and there's several things with, like, I don't know that people actually learn anything. I understand that there's a social aspect to it, but fuck, you don't need to force me into those situations. I can do that on my own. That's not your responsibility as an educator. It's really not your responsibility. So, fuck off with the social aspect of it. But also, it really, the only thing I can think of, the only good reason I can think of that a educator would use a group project is so that they don't have to grade as many things. It's, I only have to grade 5 projects instead of 30 or whatever. That's kind of it. It's just making it easier on the teacher, which, fuck you. Do your job. I know you don't get paid as much as you should, but nobody does, goddammit. Anyway, pay teachers more. Hashtag. Anyway, the whole point is that group projects kind of suck. And there's a lot of reasons why they suck. A lot more than what we've gone into. And I'm sure everyone has horror stories about a group project that they're in. I have one specifically. While I was in college, I don't understand why you would have group projects in college at all, but fucking whatever. I had one course in college where we had to present on. This was a history of music course, and every age of music we had to do a group project where we presented details on a specific type of music during the age of music. So it was very, I don't know, it was very group oriented, and of course, way back when I went to college, it was still a new thing to use resources from the internet. And so I basically got an A for my entire group because I decided I was going to use PowerPoint to pirate the videos from YouTube to then share with the rest of the class on the exact type of music. So there was examples, it was interactive. Anyway, the whole fucking thing took me 7 minutes to make, and our group constantly got A's because it was as lazy as it could possibly be. Hey, something else I'm doing right now. Anyway, the idea there is that, like, my group really loved the fact that I was there because I did all the work and I did everything, and they all got A's with almost no effort. Like, they didn't have to do anything. I did all of the searching. I did the crafting of the PowerPoint. And I liked it because I just got it done and I had full control of the project, which is not the intent of the group project. One person did all the work, nobody else learned anything, zero effort. But hey, we still achieved our goal, right? Right? It's amazing. But I don't think the professor got the intended effect other than being lazy. So, win for them too, I guess. And so, what the fuck is a shared responsibility matrix, and why are you talking about a group project, something that everybody hates? Well, good question, theoretical listener, straw man listener. Good question. Shared responsibility matrix is a document that identifies the shared responsibilities in a relationship between an organization and X. X being anything else. A customer, a vendor, another department within the organization. It is a way to track who's responsible for what and when exactly. And these are very looked over pieces of documentation, as all documentation is, but shared responsibility matrix seem to be more ignored than a lot of other pieces of documentation because they can be ambiguous and it can be difficult to craft a shared responsibility matrix, but they are important for a lot of reasons. And we'll get into some of those later on, but let's still understand more about what a shared responsibility matrix is. So, a shared responsibility matrix typically lists services and or tasks and actions that are performed in an effort to keep operations running or to finish a particular operation. And it can shift across an axis of time or crises, or there's really your x-axis across this thing are all the different tasks that are being performed, and your y-axis are all of the different periods of time or changes or times when those responsibilities change hands. And so this matrix is supposed to identify when a particular task may become somebody else's responsibility, and or when that task might change hands inadvertently or directly, and it can be a very subtle change, and a shared responsibility matrix definitely isn't something that necessarily can be crafted with a single party in mind. Sometimes you have to do it with both parties there. So I can't single-handedly create a shared responsibility matrix between me and a vendor because maybe the vendor doesn't agree with what I'm saying they're supposed to be responsible for. So in order to create this shared responsibility matrix, it might help to have that vendor on the phone with the contract that we have directly with each other, so that we can identify what under their SLA falls under their portion of the shared responsibility matrix. And we can identify this information specifically. So anyway, that's kind of what a shared responsibility matrix is. And where it becomes useful is when you are identifying a responsibility that is sort of in the middle, in the gray zone of where it might be something that you do or something that your vendor does, and you're not entirely sure who should be responsible for it. And the reason why you should list it, aside from all the other reasons that I've before, confusion and all that, is because of compliance. If you go through a compliance framework and you don't have if you have something where you're offloading a responsibility to a vendor, say for instance, your backups are going to a vendor, or a vendor is responsible for maintaining your backups, you would want to have a shared responsibility matrix to basically track that that's what the vendor is doing and answer questions. So maybe there's a question in your compliance framework of how do you ensure that your backups are consistent and unchanged, immutable, in other words. How do you make sure that your backups are immutable? And in your shared responsibility matrix, who is responsible for the storage of your backup data is important in that case, because then whose responsibility is it to make sure that that data is immutable? Well, it's the vendor's responsibility. Ultimately, it is you as the person who is doing the compliance for your business, yes, but you have assigned this task to your vendor. And having that shared responsibility matrix means not only can you put in your policy for the compliance purposes that says our vendor X is responsible for making sure that our backups are maintained, but also when you go to look for who is responsible for it when you're going through the compliance framework and you're going through the auditing process, you can answer that question without having to involve anybody else. It makes your compliance framework much easier to maintain. So, aside from the compliance framework purposes, a shared responsibility matrix is also important for legal reasons as well. And that is because there are certain tasks that vendors can perform on your behalf, some that they can't perform on your behalf, and some that they can only perform on your behalf when given permission. And sometimes if you create a shared responsibility matrix, that permission then becomes inherent because of what the shared responsibility matrix has said. Because then you have a document that you have both agreed on that then points beyond the scope of the contract, that points to who is responsible for what and when. So for instance, if you have a contract that says our vendor is responsible for responding to security emergencies or critical security instances within 2 hours of an incident happening, that's their SLA. They have an SLA of 2 hours. They have to respond within that 2 hours. But to them, to your security provider, that response might look different than it looks to you. So a shared responsibility matrix, for them, if they want to be lazy, they could say, oh, well, we isolated the device. And to you, the response means they should have responded and remediated the threat, not just mitigated it through an isolation. Like they should have gone through the entire step process to remediate. And so therefore, when you have a shared responsibility matrix that says, yeah, you can remediate, go ahead and do that, then you've given them legal permission to do so. And that shared responsibility matrix can identify that not only for your own documentation, but for theirs. And it becomes a lot less confusing than a contract worded by a lawyer who doesn't understand technology and probably shits the bed at night. Sorry, Will. Anyway, whole point being that if you are working through a shared responsibility matrix, or if you're working with a shared responsibility matrix, it makes those types of decisions linear. There's no ambiguity, and the contract gets covered in a way that everybody can understand. And so when their lowest tier worker decides they want to begin work on a specific task for you, your vendor can have that done, and they can act with confidence, and they can make sure that they are following their contract and not doing anything illegal on your behalf, or potentially illegal, something that they could get sued for by you, and doing operations and making sure that business flows properly and whatnot. So yeah, those are sort of the reasons why a shared responsibility matrix is important. Now, the other question would be, how do you make a shared responsibility matrix? And unfortunately, there are a few ways to do this. So and I can't tell you which way is best for you or your organization. You're kind of going to have to figure that out for yourself. And also, really, it kind of depends on your contracts. And it might change depending on your contracts or your security framework that you're trying to satisfy, or what tasks are specifically aligned with the security matrix, and how, or your shared responsibility matrix, or how that shared responsibility matrix might change depending on what tasks are being performed. So you might actually have to create several shared responsibility matrix, even several for the same vendor or same tasks. And the reason is because you might have a shared responsibility matrix that says when data is at X, the shared responsibility is the responsibility of it is this person's. And so let's take that. Let's take the shared let's create a shared responsibility matrix for an organization where they have their data being backed up by a vendor, a third party vendor. So on that shared responsibility matrix, what you would have is you would have three separate columns, one that says customer, one that says shared responsibility, and one that says vendor. And those are basically your three responsibilities lie. Now that may change. Those columns might change depending on what kind of shared responsibility matrix you're creating. But we're going to craft a basic one because this is a purely audio format, and I don't have a spreadsheet to show you, so we're going to keep this as simple as possible. So your customer, your shared, and your vendor columns are listed at the top. So now as we go down the list, you would basically have data is stored on local server. So that would be the responsibility of the customer. When data exists on the server, that's where it's shared. And then you would have when data is on the server, that's when it's owned by the customer. Data is in transition to backup utility. That would be that information is being, or that data is being housed, or that data is in transition, and responsibility is shared between the customer and the vendor. And then the third one, data exists within the cloud backup solution. Then that responsibility is the vendors. That's a very basic one. It's only 3x3, and of course you can adjust. You could adjust that for whatever you're doing, but that is a shared responsibility matrix, very very basic. But you might get down so specific where you have instead of those three columns, you might have times of day. So you might have morning, afternoon, evening, night. And in that shared responsibility matrix, you would list who's responsible for what tasks, backups, data delivery responsibility, security operations, so on and so forth, and have that shared responsibility matrix for who might be responsible for what at what time. And that could get very complicated. So again, a shared responsibility matrix, how to craft it, it can be a little hairy. If you search shared responsibility matrix on Google right now, they all pretty much come back with the same looking one that looks like it's all in reference to a CMMC requirement to have a shared responsibility matrix, which is fine. But it doesn't cover a lot of the ambiguities of where you might have a shared responsibility matrix or what else might make a good shared responsibility matrix. So just know that that information does exist, and that if you search for it, you can find your own examples to craft. All that being said, it would behoove you to create a shared responsibility matrix in conjunction with reviewing your contracts with your vendors, and or when you are crafting interdepartmental responsibilities or job or job titles or job descriptions for folks. A shared responsibility matrix might need to be required if you have ambiguity between people, departments, wherever. So there's a lot of options to do this. So the other reasons why to have a shared responsibility matrix, it really does go back to the group project. Because in a group project, really the biggest pain in the ass about group projects isn't the fact that, yeah, you're forcing me into a social situation and I'm an introvert, or the fact that the teacher's being lazy and I should be just as lazy as the teacher, or the fact that it doesn't actually do anything to teach anybody anything. The biggest fucking problem with group projects is the fact that I end up doing all the fucking work and everybody else ends up sitting their ass around, which a shared responsibility matrix might not fix, but at least you get the point where you can be like, no, this is your fucking job because we agreed to it in the shared responsibility matrix. Because you have folks who will avoid doing their job. And on the other side of that, you have folks who are eager beavers and want to just do every fucking thing they possibly can. And those are both bad, specifically in operations and in a legal sense and in compliance. Because if there is any ambiguity about who's responsible for what and when in a compliance framework, then that means you have a potential area where there's a leakage of data or where somebody could take advantage of a situation, or you basically have shown that you have not crafted your privileges in the principles of least privilege. So there's all of that. But really, ultimately, the problem is that if you have this kind of responsibility overreach for somebody, there are legal repercussions to that if something should happen. So as a security practitioner, and for all security practitioners out there, we have to be aware that our actions have to be explicitly covered by what we're doing. If you do something outside of your SLA or your agreement or your contract, it can have legal repercussions, even if you're doing it on behalf of a business. You can be personally charged with a crime because of what you are doing. And it's not just the red teaming or penetration testing that can get you into fucking trouble. It's responding to a threat, remediating a vulnerability, remediating a compromise can result in you being sued personally. And so having a shared responsibility matrix and making sure that you're not this fucking eager beaver who's doing things outside of the agreement will protect you, it will protect your customer, and it will make everybody fucking happy. Except for the fact that it's a pain in the ass to create, because anything having to do with group projects is like pulling teeth and being run over by a car. Can you tell I hate group projects? Well, that's all I have time for today, guys. I hope you all have a great